All right, let's continue. So here we have the data model that we're going to be implementing and mapping between Java world and we're going to map it to a relational database world. All right, so one of the first things that we'll have to do is to actually create some of these data models, right? And that's pretty easy. The first one we'll create is the user with this couple of fields. All right, so that's so let's do that. Let's come here and under the Java here we're gonna create a new class under a package that is going to be under the root package. Right? Notice that the package here is com.jga, right? So what we're going to do is that all the classes that we're going to be creating are going to be under that package, right? Because by default the JPA or web services, right? And they all are going to look at. They're going to start looking for classes under the root package. Okay. If you declare them outside of the root package, you're going to have to configure and tell them where to find them. Right. So we're not gonna to make it easier on us. We're just going to put it under the root package, right? So that it'll find them under that hierarchy. So under here we're going to create models. Right, and the class is just going to be a user. Okay, there we have it. Notice that it's under the com.jga, so that JPA is going to find it and says, okay, that's the class that I need to map to that goes under that's going to map it to a table, right? To a database table. Some of the fields that we need here are private int ID, and here we have a private string username. We have a private string password, and then we have a private string first name and private string last name. Plus, we need to convert this into a Java bean, right? So that's one of the first requirements, right? This has to follow the Java beans specification, right? That means that it needs to, all these functions are all these variables are private. It has to be accompanied with setters and getters, accessors, right? That need to be public, right? And the names of the fields that are going to be mapped to the database are going to be based on the names of the accessors, not on the names of the fields. Okay. So let's create the setters and getters. That's one of the first requirements. So let's see. We're going to source, generate the setters and getters. We're going to select all, and last name is going to generate all the setters and getters. There they are. Okay. Plus another of the requirements of JPA is of the Java Beans specification is that you have to at least have the default constructor, right? So let's have the default constructor. So I'm going to deselect everything. So that's the default no argument constructor is right there. Okay, user. There we go. All right, so now we have a Java bean, right? So we have the minimum requirements that it has to be a Java bean. Other than this, it's just a plain Java object, a poser, right? There's nothing special about this Java class, right? There's nothing interesting about it, right? So the next thing that we'll convert this into a JPA entity, all right, that will map this to an actual table in the database is that we have to declare it as an entity, right? We need to let the infrastructure know that this is mapped to some table in the database, right? Now, oftentimes the database already exists, right? So it'll already have the table will already exist. We'll have already a schema. Probably they'll have already lots and lots of records that are already created. In that case, the naming convention of the setters and getters have to follow the naming conventions of the schema that already exists. So these fields, right, the names of these fields and the names of the setters and getters would be based on the schema that already exists because you want to map to something that already exists. Okay, as opposed to what we're doing here. Right, we're mapping to a schema that doesn't exist yet. Right, there is no user table in the course manager lecture database. Okay, if you get lucky to work on a brand new project, that you get to choose the schema and you get to choose the names and everything, that's great. All right, and that's we all want to be in those kinds of projects, right? And getting to start from scratch, and we don't have to maintain somebody else's code. Nevertheless, let's assume that we have a brand new schema that we can generate from scratch. Okay. All right. So here we're going to annotate the way we configure the ORM, right? Is to tell it, hey, I want a database schema that matches the schema of this class, right? So to do that, we're going to decorate this class with the entity annotation, right? And that entity annotation, we're going to hover over it, and we'll see that it finds this javax.persistence. Okay, it's under that new package. Well, not new anymore, but it's all the JPA libraries interfaces are under that package. But notice that it also was suggesting a Hibernate version. Okay, again, because the particular implementation that we're using that's going to actually talk to the database is a Hibernate implementation, right? And Hibernate is just implementing this interface, right? But as long as we code to the interface, we are not tied to Hibernate, right? We could use other implementations of the JPA interface. All right, so that's this. So what this will do is that it will map it to a table also called user. It'll create it for us. Okay, not just yet. Let's do a couple more things. We're going to annotate what do we want to use as a primary key. Okay, and to do that, we annotate the field that we want to use as a primary key. In this case, we're using a very simple primary key. It's just an integer. Okay, but JPA allows you to do combined primary keys, or compound primary keys, right? Where you might have multiple fields, right, that are combined will make the primary key. To do that, instead of providing a primitive data type, you can provide your own class. You can provide your own class that contains fields in there, and each one of those fields will be mapped to the fields that you would use as a primary key. Okay, let's keep it simple. Let's just use a single field primary key. All right, so as it stands there, this is all we really need. Right? Let's import ID. Notice again we have we're going to import the persistence IDE, JavaX persistence IDE. So what this will do is it will create a table with a primary key ID. That's all it will create. Plus all the usernames, all the password, all the first name. We'll create all those fields for us with the correct data type, right? For the default, for strings, it'll use a varchar, right? It'll by default choose 255 characters. For the integer, it'll be int 11. So those are all defaults, right? That we can override here. Also, the primary key will not be auto incremented. Right, meaning you have to provide the primary key. Now, to simplify things, you can add additional configurations, such as I don't want to have to deal with creating the primary key. Instead, I want the database to do that for me. I have the database auto incremented. So to turn that on, we can use another annotation. Right? We can say this is a generated value. This is a generated value, and we're going to load that from generated value, and there it is. So let's import it right there. Okay. Now the generated value, depending on there's several strategies that the primary key can be generated from. Right. It could be auto incremented, right? Meaning find the highest integer and just increment it by 1, and then use that value. Or there's other strategies such as creating sequences, right, where you can create a table that contains just an enumerated data type of integers that goes from 1 to several thousands, hundreds of thousands of values that can be guaranteed to be unique. And you can read those values from these sequences. Okay, a very common thing that you would do in Oracle. Here you can configure and say, well, which strategy do you want to use, right? So the strategy, you can turn it on by providing arguments here, strategy, and assigning it to any number of strategies. Here we can, if we want to use an auto increment, such as the way MySQL supports, we need to choose the identity strategy. Okay, the identity strategy will create in MySQL will create an auto increment primary key. Okay, all right, great. So we have our first class. What we'd like to be able to do is to start interacting with it. We'd like to be able to create users, delete users, update users. See if we can implement a couple of these. All right, awesome. Right, so there we go. We did entity ID and generated value. All right, so to start interacting with the database and start actually using the ORM, right? We need to create an instance of the ORM, right? And to do that, Spring gives us a nice boilerplate class that allows us to automatically configure this ORM. One of the things that the ORM will need to know is, what do you want me to map, right? We'll need to give it the class user and say, hey, this is a user, and I want you to give me all the boilerplate implementation of this user object. I want you to automatically be able to create user objects, update user objects, delete user objects, find me all user objects, find me the user object for this primary key. Those are all the common CRUD operations that we would expect we can implement, right? So to do that, the Spring framework has a boilerplate class for us that called the CRUD repository. CRUD for create, read, update, and delete. That already implements those 5 common operations. Okay, so that you don't have to implement them anymore yourselves. Right. So those 5, or 10 or 15 lines that we used to have to write ourselves using the JDBC. That's very low level, right? So instead, that implementation, we're going to be using this instead. Okay. All right. So under here, we'll create the CRUD operations and start interacting with it. All right, so let's do here a new class, and this will be under here. It'll be new class, and this will be repositories. So this will be .repositories, and this will be UserRepository. Okay. So under here, I'm just going to copy this. Okay, we're going to import the Spring interfaces. We're gonna import also our user, and here is our interface, the user repository. And notice that it extends CRUD repository. And notice that it's parameterized, right, with the user, right? That is the schema that we want to be able to synchronize with the database, right? So what the CRUD repository is going to be able to do is say it's going to derive the name of the table based on the name of the class. It's going to derive the schema from the data types of the proper attributes inside of the user class, and it's going to if there is no table for it, it'll create it. If it's already there, it'll just keep using that, right? And also it takes a second argument, the data type of the primary key, right? Which in this case is it's an integer. Okay. All right. So this will be the generated schema that the JPA will create for us. To be able to test it, we actually need to exercise it, right? To start invoking it and calling on it to create a new user and whatnot. Okay. and we'll do that in the next presentation. All right.